Breaking news in the NBA. We have a breaking story from Shams Charania here. NBA teams are probing the availability of Bulls two-time All-Star Zach LaVine, and there is increased openness from both sides about exploring a trade. Again, according to Shams Charania. Shams breaking this news that both LaVine and the Bulls are willing to work together to find a trade partner for the multi-time All-Star, and that is very big news, especially this early into the season. November 14th, you guys know, coming into the year, I was very low on the Chicago Bulls, saying I thought there was a really good chance that they broke everything up, traded some of their players. I picked them to finish 14th in the Eastern Conference. I was not very high on this team coming in, and I think this kind of validates my points coming into the year of this team is not set up to succeed. They don't have a lot of long-term hope, so tearing it all down is probably the best case scenario. I made a video just the other day on fire sale situations where the Bulls basically trade everybody, and we're going to talk about some deals in this video, which I'm very excited for. I hope you guys are as well. If you are, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and without further ado, let's jump into our first trade of 5. Now, there is something extremely important to talk about. Some of these trades up here are going to say failed. That is perfectly a-okay. It doesn't matter if it says failed up there, because some of them have recent trade and recent signing kind of stipulations where the Bulls would have to necessarily hold on to Zach LaVine until around December 15th, January 15th, depending on which team they're trying to work out a trade with. But they could basically have a deal in place to execute a month or two from now, depending on the situation. So we might not see a LaVine trade in the coming days. It's still possible we do. I have a couple iterations of that as well this year, but in this video, excuse me. But this year, I think that it's important for Chicago to get the best value they can. In this deal with the 76ers, they're trading Zach LaVine to the Chicago Bulls. Now, my personal preference for Philly is to be patient, let this year play out, go into the offseason with max cap space, hold on to their assets, and then make two big moves at the same exact time. If they were to do something like this, it is not following that type of pathway, okay? But in this, with the recent trade stipulations, they have to wait 2 months from the date of the James Harden trade to ultimately trade Marcus Morris Sr. and Robert Covington. I also have them throwing in Furkan Korkmaz, who has wanted a trade for a long time, famously. And then Daniil House Jr. goes in here as well for money reasons. And then the 76ers also give up 2 first-round picks. They give up the swap that they received in 2026, and they also trade out that 2029 first they got from the Los Angeles Clippers for Zach LaVine. And going out and doing this, it would still leave the 76ers with 2 tradable first-round picks and a pick swap, which gives them some more flexibility this offseason. They send out a decent amount of money here, actually, about $38.5 million of their own salary for a guy who's got multiple years left on his contract in Zach LaVine. I think he would be a pretty smooth fit next to Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid. Now, to be honest with you, if I'm Daryl Morey, I'm not even getting involved in the Zach LaVine sweepstakes, but that's just my own personal opinion and preference. It's very important when I make these videos to acknowledge, look, this is a real possibility. I think this is something that we could actually see happen, even if it's not something I would do, and I think this is one that does make some sense for both sides to consider. The Bulls get 2 first-round picks for LaVine. That's about what I'm expecting him to net, just given his contract, age, injury history. 2 first-round picks is about the price point I would expect to see. Kind of a similar package to what James Harden landed, similar package to what Drew Holiday netted. And in here, the Bulls, I think one of the big benefits of this is they take in no long-term money. They get 4 expiring contracts, which means they could go into this offseason kind of with a pretty quick retooling idea if they wanted to while they are adding all of these picks. Now, I don't think that's the best way to go. I do think an actual true teardown is the preferred option, at least if I was running Chicago. But I think this gives them some real good optionality. Maybe they like someone in free agency, even if it's not a star, they can go get whoever they want and afford to pay him in the meantime. They have a lot of other tradable assets, which leads us into our second trade here with the Los Angeles Lakers, and this one actually includes Alex Caruso. So like I said earlier, this one says failed again at the top. There's reasons why. D'Angelo Russell, Rui Hachimura both have salary increases. Because of that, they cannot be traded until January 15th since they were signed with bird rights with a 20% raise in salary, and the Lakers are over the cap. So there's all of those, cap mechanisms in the CBA that dictate when these two players D'Lo and Rui can be traded. So if this trade were to go down, we'd have to wait 2 full months until January 15th to see it. But for the Lakers' perspective here, I think, if you are going to pivot to a third star, Zach LaVine just inherently makes more sense than a guy like Russell Westbrook did. You also bring Alex Caruso back to the franchise. And Gabe Vincent's been pretty disappointing this year for the Lakers. I think that's fair to say. Essentially here, what you're doing is you're turning D'Lo, Rui, Hood-Schifino, and a 2029 first into LaVine, and you're turning Gabe Vincent into Caruso. And people with the Bulls are going to say, well, that's not enough assets. You're getting a 2029 unprotected first round pick. The way I look at it is maybe the Lakers could go out trade D'Angelo Russell, or the Bulls could go out trade D'Angelo Russell for a little bit more, trade Rui Hachimura for a little bit more. In comparison to this deal, where basically the players the Sixers are getting back as complete nothings in terms of league-wide value, I think D'Lo does have value. I think Rui has value. Gabe Vincent, maybe you could even reroute somewhere. Maybe Miami would be interested in reacquiring him. Hood-Schifino was a first-round pick this past draft, so I know the value doesn't look as sexy in here, especially since you're also giving up Caruso, but I think that there are pathways to kind of increasing this trade into a 3-team, 4-team, maybe even 5-team deal, which is always hard to do. There's no guarantee the Bulls could do that, but there's a pathway here which, they could turn some of these other pieces that are getting into more value, gives them some more long-term flexibility than just this first and Hood-Schifino in the initial return. And for the Lakers, Caruso and LaVine would be excellent next to LeBron, Anthony Davis. I do think that LaVine, $40 million a year for your third best player is a pretty steep price point, especially with the new CBA. But getting Caruso in here is really important for them as well. Very good contract that he's on, and I think honestly the Lakers would do this. I'm not sure the Bulls would, especially since they have to wait until January 15th. That's one of the holdups in this entire situation. Going into our next one, this is one with the Brooklyn Nets, and I think a lot of people have looked at the Brooklyn Nets as a potential trade spot for somebody. Whether that was Damian Lillard when there was rumors about would he want to go play with Mikal Bridges. What does that all look like? This deal's a very interesting one for a couple of different reasons. I think this is actually a very strong return for Chicago. You get, from a young player perspective, Dariq Whitehead, first round pick this year. He can really fill it up. He almost would step into Zach LaVine's role on the Bulls as a shot maker, scorer type. Now, listen, he's got a long ways to go to get to LaVine's level, but he's the type of player who, in high school, playing for Montverde Academy, he was the National Player of the Year at the high school level. Duke, his freshman season there was a little up and down. He still shot over 40% from three. He's somebody who's a very, very good shooter. You also get 2 first-round picks here in this deal with Brooklyn. You get the 2025 first-rounder via Phoenix, which is a really, really good piece to have. That comes from the Kevin Durant trade. The 2024 draft's up next, so within 2 years, could the Suns look like a completely different team? I think that's possible if you look at Durant's track record, Beal's impact on winning historically. That 2025 Phoenix first might not be as bad as people initially expect. And then the 2027 Philly first, that comes from the James Harden trade that the Nets executed, and I think those are 2 assets where the Nets would be saying, okay, we're comfortable giving those up in a trade for LaVine, but the Bulls could maybe look at them as, hey, there's some potential upside with those 2 selections. And then you also get Ben Simmons here to match money. And Simmons, listen, I told everyone coming into the year I was expecting him to have a much better season. I think he's significantly healthier than he was a year ago, which is partially why he's looked so much better. But I also do just flat out think that Simmons has some real serious flaws, and if you're Chicago, he's a guy that probably puts some fans in the seats, not a ton. He keeps your team in the spotlight a little bit because he has a pretty big social media following. He's a very recognizable name, former first overall pick, but he's also not on a long-term contract at this point. 2 years left, so you got this season and next, and then it kind of gives you long-term running into cap space if you want to operate that way if you're Chicago, which I do think makes some sense for them. If they are able to execute a Zach LaVine trade, long-term financial flexibility should be important. This deal kind of opens up pathways to that while getting 2 first-round picks and a really talented young player in Dariq Whitehead. And for Brooklyn, the whole sell job here is you're adding a really good half-court scorer onto a team that's already pretty competent. I wouldn't say great or good even, but I think that adding LaVine in makes you significantly better, and you could probably justify the price point. Going from Simmons to LaVine does make you quite a bit better. Now with Brooklyn, this does hurt your rebounding. That is a big flaw on their team already. They need to do a better job rebounding basketball. This makes them even a little bit worse at that category. But it does just flat out make you a better offensive team. With Dinwiddie still, you'd have LaVine. You also have Cam Johnson, Mikal Bridges, Nick Claxton. That's probably your starting five. It's a pretty good starting five. If you want to look at it that way, you also have Dorian Finney-Smith, who I'm a big believer in. I love his game. I think the Nets have some good talent. It's just about kind of finding players that mesh into that, and I think LaVine would be an intriguing option. If I'm being honest here, if I'm the Nets, I probably don't settle on a LaVine trade myself. I'm just lower on LaVine than most people, though, so I could still see them going in on something like this. Our next deal is with the Indiana Pacers, and I've got a lot of Pacers fans here on the channel, and this is a trade that could happen today, just like we saw with the Bulls and Nets trade. This is something that if the Pacers decide this is what they want to do, they could do it immediately, and it's actually funny. Both teams are sending out essentially $40 million exactly. This is basically a 1-to-1 salary trade. Obviously, there's a 4-to-1 trade here. The Pacers are giving up 4 players, but Pacers are already one of the deepest teams in the league, and I think they would definitely, no question, do this type of trade if it became available to them. And I know people in the comments are going to be saying, oh my gosh, Zach LaVine's worth way more than this. Trust me, with the contract, age, injury stuff, if he goes for more than 2 first-round picks, I'd be pretty surprised. And I think for Indiana, this is a home run trade for a couple of reasons. One, you're basically upgrading the Buddy Hield minutes into Zach LaVine minutes. It kind of reconfigures your starting lineup a little bit. I think LaVine, Halliburton, Bruce Brown could be a really solid trio. You are a little small in the backcourt, especially since Halliburton defensively sometimes is a little shaky. But Miles Turner is a great frontcourt player, and I think on top of that, with some of the other frontcourt options you have, like Obi Toppin and Jarris Walker, who I want to see get more and more minutes here in the near future, you have some defensive structure in the front court, and Bruce Brown's a good defender individually too. So you're having a lineup with 3 really good defenders likely. Obviously Obi Toppin's not a good defender, I would say, but I think that, you know, with Jarris Walker kind of being the long-term power forward for this team, I think most people are assuming you have some good structure there in place to inherit a guy like Zach LaVine into your roster. The Bulls here, again, this is about financial flexibility. 1-year deal for Buddy Hield. Maybe you could even reroute him somewhere into a third team. I'm sure Buddy Hield would have significant value around the league, whether that's for 3 or 4 second rounders, kind of like what we saw from Jay Crowder last year, or is it like 1 low-end first from a contender? If you can find that deal, you make that deal if you're Chicago. Daniel Tice, you know, small salary. TJ McConnell, small salary. Maybe those 2 guys could get rerouted. I'm sure the Mavericks would have some interest in McConnell if something were to become available. Jordan Nwora, young player, really good shooter, has kind of lost all of his minutes this year in Indiana. Kind of a product of their depth that I mentioned earlier. And then really the reason why this is a great trade for Indiana, you're giving up 2 first-round picks this year. It's the latest of the following 4 teams: OKC, Houston, LA, that's the Clippers, or Utah. So you're looking at picks that, it's a pick that's going to be relatively low this year just because it's the latest pick of those 4 teams, likely going to be either Oklahoma City or or Los Angeles. Maybe Houston. Houston's been playing really great this year as well, so a lot of credit to them. And your own 2024 first, which again, right now the Pacers are kind of slated to be in the 20s. So you're giving up 2 picks in the 20s, Buddy Hield, who maybe nets the Bulls another first-round pick, and kind of filler in terms of salary, which is really, really great for them. And part of why this is so great is this keeps all of their long-term flexibility open. After this draft, they would still have all of their picks tradable. This doesn't like kind of stop them from making future deals in any sense of the word, because they'd have all of their own picks. They have a lot of flexibility still outside of this. And honestly, LaVine makes them a lot better right now, which I think would be really good. They have a really good transition game. LaVine would fit into that. I like this trade a lot for Indiana, actually, even though I'm not a big LaVine guy myself. I think this deal does make a lot of sense for them. And from Chicago's perspective, if you were able to turn Buddy Hield into more assets, I think it's right around the value level you should be getting for LaVine at this point of his career, especially with where the Bulls are currently at. And then our final trade here for the video, we're going to talk about one more team after this one, though, and it's the Miami Heat in a very weird move. And it's Caruso and LaVine both going to Miami. And this is essentially the, oh my gosh, the Bulls don't really get as many good offers as they were expecting or hoping, and they kind of settle on something. And it's too far out first, gives you some ammunition to add to the cabinet. With 2027 and 2029 Completely unprotected first from the Miami Heat. You also get a second rounder in 2026. Small sweetener, doesn't really move the needle that much, but you'd rather get it than not get it. And you also take in the salaries of Kyle Lowry, who's expiring, and Duncan Robinson, who's on a 3-year deal. Not great. And maybe you argue in here too that, look, maybe the Bulls have to get like a Jaime Jaquez in this or a Nikola Jovic, and I think that's completely fair. In fact, let's go in and adjust the trade right now. Just with me thinking about it, I think that is definitely a fair criticism of that type of deal. Maybe like let's put Nikola Jovic into this deal, and we'll resend it through there. Jovic comes into this deal, makes it a little bit better for the Bulls. Just looking at the value, I think this is something, you're kind of taking in Duncan Robinson's contract. Even though Robinson's been really solid this year for Miami, I think this is still something the Heat would consider. LaVine gives them half-court scoring punch. I know someone in the comment section is going to say, oh my God, the Heat aren't going to get Zach LaVine. They like to play defense. Listen, the Heat play Duncan Robinson for 20-plus minutes a night. It's not necessarily about individual defenders in Miami. It's about building a good, solid, strong team defense, which Eric Spoelstra is probably the best in the league at, honestly, as a head coach. And you also get Alex Caruso, who is a huge plus for you defensively. This is a massive win for Miami, in my opinion. If you're able to get both of these two guys, I think LaVine really significantly helps their scoring punch. You move Tyler Hero back to a 6-man role. I think that significantly bolsters your scoring punch off the bench. Caruso becomes a really nice piece for you off the bench as well, or maybe even in the starting lineup with Caruso, LaVine, Jimmy, Bam, and Caleb Martin. Maybe that's your starting 5, and I think that's a very good starting 5, especially when you have a good coach, really good system. And then maybe there's an argument that, look, Chicago, instead of getting all of this, would rather get Tyler Hero in a first or something along those lines. I think that's an interesting pathway and one to consider. The last thing I want to look at here, let's go back over to Fanspo right now, is I want to talk about a New York Knicks trade and why people are going to be expecting to see the Knicks in here. There's not reasoning for them to actually do this. LaVine, $40 million. It's hard to match money here for them. Evan Fournier would have to be part of it at about $19 million, but you still have a long ways to go. You have to at least put in about $15 million more. If I'm New York, I'm not trading Julius Randle in a deal for LaVine. That doesn't make any sense. Definitely not trading Brunson. I'm not trading RJ Barrett in a trade for Zach LaVine. I also don't think that makes any sense just from an age and production standpoint, injury history. I wouldn't give up RJ Barrett straight up for Zach LaVine. I just wouldn't. Even though I'm not the biggest RJ Barrett guy either, I think that, like LaVine maybe does make them a little bit better now, but he's also way more expensive and older and has torn his ACL in the past. Mitchell Robinson, I'm not throwing him in. He's such a good offensive rebounder. That's a huge part of how the Knicks are so good, honestly. I think it's a really underrated element of basketball. You can't give up Hart or Dante DiVincenzo. I just don't think that makes sense in pursuit of Zach LaVine, especially since DiVincenzo is recently signed. So then do you get like into Hartenstein and Quickly? Is that like where your package is? And then you have to still throw in some more money. Like, is Quentin Grimes a part of that? I'm sure Knicks fans just kind of shriveled up and cringed when I said that because they don't want to give up Quentin Grimes. They don't want to give up Quickly to begin with. Like, that's already like the main player in the deal. Maybe Jericho Sims and Deuce McBride go. Like, you get into something like this, and is this a trade the Knicks want to execute? I don't really think so. Like, why would you want to give up all of these pieces, especially someone like Emmanuel Quickly, who's a really important player for them off the bench? Yes, LaVine makes your starting lineup a lot better. I don't know if it makes your team a whole lot better. You kind of give up a lot of flexibility by making a trade like this, and I just don't know if it's really one that I could see being fathomable for the New York Knicks. Hopefully you guys did enjoy today's video. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content. Like Sham said, NBA teams are probing the availability of Bulls 2-time All-Star Zach LaVine, and there's increased openness from both sides about exploring a trade. So, like I said, the Bulls potentially exploring a fire sale, and Zach LaVine might be playing on a new team relatively soon. Hopefully you guys did enjoy. Let me know in the comment section below what your favorite trade package was. Let me know if there's a trade package I didn't think of in this one that you guys think does make some sense. And we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.